Sup gamers, Rainy Potato here with 2,000 hours in Darkest Dungeon 2, with a review of the 1.0 release as it currently stands, almost a month after release, and what changes I would like to see as this game continues to evolve. Let's start with the strengths. The game is gorgeous, with a beautiful design from the biomes to the enemies to the heroes and all the animations. It perfectly captures and perfects the atmosphere of Darkest Dungeon. I'm not usually a lore person, but the writing in this game is fantastic, and I find all the cutscenes, from the opening stagecoach crawl to the hero shrines to the finale, to be captivating, though I do wish we could speed past the intro sometimes. The combat is a huge step up from Darkest Dungeon 1, replacing the varying stats like accuracy and dodge with the new token system that's a lot easier to understand and more fun to manipulate. They also removed hero-based strength and gave each individual skill its own damage range rather than the weird damage modifiers in DD1. Gone is the infinite stun stall and heal gimmicks of Darkest Dungeon 1, with most stuns locked behind combo or double daze attacks to make them more rare and impactful, and most heals, both HP and stress, are locked behind thresholds to eliminate taking 100 turns to sit there and heal against a dancing skeleton, requiring more decision making to solve problems. They've also given you more skills, 11 in total, with 5 equipable to play around with, along with a new combat item slot that can either give you an extra attack, a heal, or some sort of combat buff. In addition to the expansion of skills, each hero also has 3 subclasses, or paths, that change the way the game is played. All these paths still have some balance issues, with many of them unplayable. On net, you're still getting more effective heroes than in Darkest Dungeon 1 with paths. Of course, more options is always better in a roguelite format. For trinkets, what was one of the least interesting aspects of Darkest Dungeon 2 early on is now one of the best, with most rare trinkets being quite interesting and enabling a variety of unique builds. Farming trinkets is a lot more exciting in Darkest Dungeon 2 than Darkest Dungeon 1, with most good trinkets being locked in certain regions, forcing you to make decisions on which biomes you want to visit and in what order to obtain the right trinkets for the team. Cultist encounters and academic studies also have their own unique rare trinkets to farm, making for more on-the-fly decision-making that varies from run to run. For specific 1.0 changes, of course the Flagellant was an incredible addition to the game. He may be a bit overtuned at the moment, but I'm glad as development has progressed, we continue to get more unique and complex mechanics introduced. I'm pretty excited to see what direction Red Hook goes in future hero updates, and I would be interested in seeing future hero-specific enemy encounters like death. It would fit nicely with the game's overarching theme of confronting your past. The Acts 4 and 5 bosses are easily the best in the whole game. They are not overtuned like the original Act 3 boss, and they are not obnoxious puzzles either. They are possible to kill blind if you have a solid understanding of game mechanics and a strong team. Speaking of the Act 3 boss, we just got a recent patch to tone it down and make it easier to understand. It's a bit undertuned at the moment, again makes taunt tanking a little too OP, and will need further adjustments, but they've removed the bad puzzle aspect and instant nukes that blind players received that entirely lacked player agency. And finally, for 1.0, we got the new difficulty system, with a variety of different infernal flames and the new scaling Radiant Torch system. The Radiant system is an incredible addition, giving less experienced players a way to complete the game, and the Radiant Flame scales stronger the more you lose. A great way to be able to integrate newer players into the game without having to balance the whole game around them. Unfortunately, moving to the negative section of the review, the Infernal Flame doesn't quite hit the mark. Currently, the system functions sort of like an Ascension system, except you aren't forced to play the early Ascensions, and frankly, they aren't much of a difficulty spike at all. And then you have the Stygian Flame, which combines most, but not all for some reason, of the modifiers of the earlier flames, making them redundant, while also not being challenging enough for skilled players or for meta comps, especially compared with the challenge of Torchless in Darkest Dungeon 1. Obviously, self-inflicted challenges exist, and mods will exist in the future, and Red Hook certainly shouldn't spend a lot of time balancing the game around the 1% of players, but the game does need an in-game difficulty spike for real long-term roguelite replayability. Ideally, I would like an infinite version of the Radiant Flame, but in reverse, with the game constantly adding random debuffs and enemy buffs with each consecutive win. I would like this to be infinite to combat the wild win streaks some players have. I think it would be hilarious to keep stacking debuffs until you finally collapse trying and failing to protect your 5 HP Alchemist. I also think region-based difficulty modifiers would be interesting. Rather than the flame giving you pointless candle rewards, you could select an even harder, absurd difficulty for a single region in exchange for an increase in loot, similar to Torchless in Darkest Dungeon 1. Either way, something similar will have to be implemented for long-term enjoyment on the level of DD1. And continuing with the discussion over long-term roguelite play, Red Hook will have to continue to expand on the chapter system and make them more unique and ultimately customizable. In early access, they indicated there would be an alternate Act 1 option after you complete the first tutorial zone. Currently, only Acts 3 to 5 are the only ones with any real replay value because the difficulty is just too low on the early acts. I do like, at least for Act 1, the easier, shorter taste of DD2 for newer players, but I would also like to replay the locks, as they were the most balanced in early access and also enabled AoE to be relevant. Just the option to revert to normal mob difficulties, 3 regions, and the exemplar with doubled HP for the locks would be great. I would also like to be able to run the short-length 2-region mission in other acts, with the option of exemplar or no, because sometimes a 3-hour runtime is just longer than you really want to play. More customization in a game like this is very important. Speaking of run length, the game is definitely a lot smoother and quicker than in early access, but I would definitely like further optional reductions in cutscenes, an in-game option to speed up the stagecoach and other animations to make 2 or less hour runs more achievable without removing any actual gameplay. Also, the Tangle is still an awful experience, punishing on average PCs, but I've seen even good PCs struggle with frame rate at times, to the point where sometimes I'll just skip a Tangle altogether just to avoid the lag. Other additions to make the roguelite experience more enjoyable would be, of course, a sprinkle of new enemies. 1 to 3 more for each region, and road fights would be nice, would put the enemy variety more on par with DD1, and you could make more of them act-focused for more variety among the chapters. We do know the Collector and Gaunt Churigen are coming, and that'll be a nice improvement for the game. Of course, general balance changes will also need to be a constant work in progress for a game like this. I do like that they made the Tangle a real threat, now on par or even surpassing the Shroud, at least in later regions with Ordainment, but it makes the nerfs in the Sprawl and the Fetter all more glaring. Especially in the Sprawl, there is no real danger until the late game ladyship. With the introduction of 0% DBR for enemies, I feel like it would make sense to add that back in for the Immolatus and the Lady. For heroes, about a third of the paths are still not really viable, offering no real roles, while we still have the handful of S-tier paths that are simply Hero Plus, like Vanguard, Ravager, Virtuoso, and Sharpshot. And despite Flagellant coming in and being elite competition for the Man-at-Arms, maybe even surpassing him in some aspects, he still just needs a rework. It's absurd to have one tank soar above the rest in constant taunt and block generation to make him unkillable in comparison to the rest of the party. And on the other end, of course, the Occultist needs a fresh look to spruce up his unchecked power mechanic, which is a bit embarrassing in comparison with Vestal's Conviction. And now to my least favorite sections of this game. I continue to despise the hero shrines and their mechanics that make me dread every time I open up a fresh profile. The lore is great, and I wish it could have been kept at that. There have been some real small changes to make the minigames more readable, but at best you're getting a handful of cute puzzles, while the vast majority are a huge waste of time with no narrative value, especially the ones on rails that are intentional losses that take forever to play out, while there are a few you can still lose, which is a huge slap in the face as far as wasting time and progression. And beyond this, hero shrines are extremely limited, especially given they aren't scouted at base. You could complete this game 3 times over and still not have half the skills unlocked with the wrong RNG. I know they aren't going to be removed from the game, but I'd like them to be scouted at default, and have at least 2 guaranteed per region, both accessible. This would not only speed up the acquisition of skills so you can actually play the game, but also introduce real choices with each region between scaling for your current fights and meta progression for your full profile. And finally, the UI could use some work. There's a lot of information in this game, and I grant it can be difficult to get it all on screen in a cohesive manner, but it does need to be more easily readable in some way. The new path system just highlights this. To figure out what your new Flagellant does, you have to spend 20 minutes flipping back and forth through multiple menus with no direct comparison ever available. Just like the token glossary is viewable with a click of the button, making navigating actual combat a breeze, we need skill comparisons to be easily viewable, especially if they continue to switch over to the new path system, like they did for the Grave Robber. In addition, they've added a lot more information about what different items and quirks do, but some are still not very clear, and in a game with RNG, adding additional information asymmetry isn't very fun for the player. Overall, I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed my DD2 experience, as should be obvious from my 2,000 hours that have already almost surpassed my DD1 playtime. There are still a lot of issues that need to be addressed for the long-term survivability of this game. It hasn't quite beaten DD1 for me in its current state, but after witnessing the growth of this game during early access, I have a lot of faith in Red Hook, and I hope all of you who love the game like I do continue to give constructive feedback so this game can continue to progress. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe. I post new videos every day.